Now, this is the Apostle Paul. Now, he's the one that wrote the book of Philippians, right? And so he struggled with this. He wrote about it. He says, I struggle with the same kinds of things that you're struggling with. Check this out in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. He says, even though I, Paul, have received such wonderful revelations from God, and he did. You can read the New Testament. He has all kinds of great revelations about God. So to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. Do you get that? There's a thorn in his flesh, a messenger from Satan. Satan was manipulating his physical circumstance to torment him. And he didn't think that he could carry on his ministry in the way that he ought to because of this. It's a thorn in his flesh. It was constantly after him. 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. 3 different times I begged the Lord. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, in the hardships, in the persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. We never hear of Paul complaining again. Whatever it was that was tormenting him, stopped tormenting him. Because the moment that he received the word of grace that God was speaking to him, the torment left. Did the thorn in his flesh leave? No. He still saw that bully every day. He still walked every day right beside him, but the torment was gone. The teeth had been knocked out of that enemy. It no longer had any power over him. And once we receive a word of grace that God is trying to speak to us today, the same thing happens to us. That's what grace does. And when we look at the word grace in the New Testament, we go back into the Greek because the New Testament was written mostly in Greek. And so grace comes from this word, this Greek word, charis, okay? And it literally means graciousness, especially the divine influence upon the heart, its reflection in the life. It means acceptable, benefit, favor, gift, joy, liberality, and thanks worthy. And it comes from another word, another related word that's kind of the root word of charis is kero. You don't have to memorize this, but just listen. And kero means this, to be full of cheer. To be full of cheer. That is calmly happy or well off. So when we put those together, we get this idea of grace then, that grace quite literally then is God's favor, God's benefit, God's good pleasure expressed to us in our hearts, and it creates in us a sense of gratitude and joy and cheer. See, some people have this non-biblical view of grace. They say, well, I can go out and I can do whatever I want to do because I've got grace. So if I want to go get drunk every night, I can do that. If I want to cuss and spit and hoop and holler every night, I can do that. If I want to sleep around with whoever I want to sleep around, I can do that because, bless God, I have grace. Grace is so wonderful, amazing grace. How sweet is that? Grace is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Grace is what I just told you that it was. God's benefit, God's favor, God's graciousness expressed in our life that creates a sense of joy and cheer and gratitude in us. Romans 6 shoots down this kind of grace, by the way. Romans 6:1 says, well then, should we keep on sinning so that God can show us more and more of his wonderful grace? That's a great question for anybody that tells you, I can do anything I want because of grace. Just go Romans 6:1 and ask him this question. Well then, should we keep on sinning so that God can show us more and more of his wonderful grace? Of course not. Since we have died to sin, how can we continue to live in it? Or have you forgotten that when we were joined with Christ Jesus in baptism, we joined him in his death? For we died and were buried with Christ by baptism. And just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now also we may live new lives. And since we have been united with him in his death, we will also be raised to life as he was. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We are no longer slaves to sin. We are no longer slaves to sin, for when we died with Christ, we were set free from the power of sin. Does sin still exist? Yes. Are we under its power? No. Since we died with Christ, we know we will also live with him. We are sure of this because Christ was raised from the dead and he will never die again. Death no longer has any power over him. Does death still exist? Yes. Does it have any power over him or us? No. When he died once to break the power of sin. The power of sin is broken. The power of death is broken. The power of the grave is broken. The power of your past is broken. Through the grace of God.